When I was a kid, Max Payne scared the living hell out of me. Specifically, the opening where his wife and child are murdered by drug-induced psychosis Valkyr addicts, and the part where he is tripping on drugs himself, and you have to run along a line made of blood while hearing your wife and baby both crying and begging for their lives. As a kid, these parts legitimately terrified me and made me think that Max Payne was almost like a horror game. Now I'm an adult and I've replayed it multiple times because it's just a really good game, and no, it's not a horror game. The original title of this video was even going to be, is Max Payne a horror game? And the answer is no. But it does have some scary and very realistically disturbing parts in it. It also has an amazingly eerie and quiet atmosphere and gunplay that still holds up to this day and even rivals some modern shooter games that come out. Obviously, I really like Max Payne. Actually, I really like the first two Max Payne games a bunch, but this video is about the first one. Something I've wanted to talk about for a long time because it's just been something that has stuck with me for a long time. Remedy as a company is one of my favorite game-making companies, and they made Max Payne. And I think Max Payne is a really interesting game to look at from a design perspective, from a legacy perspective of Remedy. Also, apparently a lot of people play it around this time of year because it takes place during a very snow-heavy New York, and it makes people get in the Christmas atmosphere, which is funny because of how dark the game can be, but also silly, so yeah. I think it's a good topic for a video around this time of year. So we're going to talk about Max Payne 1, its story, its writing, its gameplay, and the effects that it had on Remedy as a company throughout the years. So I hope you strap in. I hope you got some bullet time saved up because you're going to need it. Let's get into it.
My cover had been blown. The door slammed shut behind me, and then I was dodging bullets like raindrops.
Before Max Payne was a slow-mo bullet diving undercover cop in a goofy outfit, he was a detective and a loving husband and father to Michelle Payne and Rose Payne, his wife and daughter. This idyllic life would soon turn into a nightmare when he came home from work one day to find that his home had been ransacked and that it seemed that someone was attacking his wife and daughter. He gets a mysterious call on the phone from someone who says they can't help him.
They're still here. You have to...
Good. I'm afraid I cannot help you.
Who is this?
And upon going upstairs, he finds that his wife and daughter both have been murdered by a group of men who seem to be suffering from psychosis induced by a drug known as Valkyr. This opening is very disturbing and itself almost dreamlike, but it does play realistically. It's just showing Max's state of mind as he enters this is fucked up because it's a fucked up situation.
No, God, no, please, Michelle. Oh, baby.
It's arguably one of the worst things that could happen to a person, and yes, it is diffused a little bit by when it cuts to the comic scene, and the delivery of this is kind of silly, and it plays the music.
No!
Which, honestly, that's a problem with this game in general, is they'll have really serious scenes that then cuts to these comic panels with the background music changing from the eerie silence, which is both a thing that I like and also a quirk that kind of... it makes it what it is, but yeah, it's silly. After this, we cut to 3 years later, where Max has, at the behest of his friend Alex, gone undercover in the Punchinello drug family to try and find out who is distributing Valkyr, who is, why is, and taking the whole organization down. Now, of course, this is when the real gameplay starts, when you begin to play as Max Payne, running around and killing gangsters and bad guys and things like that. But you did actually get to play the opening and walk around the Payne house, which I really appreciate. I think letting players play even small emotional moments like that really helps with your immersion into a character, story, and world, and something I think a lot of AAA games in the modern times don't do enough of. Yes, you should let your players be their character when they are doing something badass and experience it and do it themselves, but you should also let them be the character and do things during emotional moments, or scary moments, or disturbing moments. It really helps you get into the world and that character. Anyway, you run around in these subway tunnels, you fight gangsters, you try to save people, and then they get murdered by gangsters. You eventually meet your friend, only for him to get shot by a killer suit, and you find out that it was a setup, you weren't even supposed to be here, and he wasn't supposed to be here.
There was nothing I could do. He was dead. I could tell by the empty, accusing stare of his eyes.
And you're being framed for his murder, and Max has to go off the rails. He's not playing by the books anymore. He's just going through and taking down this entire criminal empire and trying to clear his name, but really he's just on a tear for revenge at this point. Max decides to follow the only lead that he has, which is to track down Jack Lupino, the guy who's been peddling Valkyr for the Punchinello family, believing he was the one that set him up and killed Alex. Max follows lead after lead, kills gangster after gangster, trying to bring down the network that distributes Valkyr, but also to find the source of it. This adventure takes you through seedy hotels, seedy apartment buildings, seedy gothic clubs, seedy warehouses, lots of seed here. I mean, there's literally a scene of a guy getting his cock sucked, and then him and the girl who is sucking it both try to kill you, and he still has his pants down, which is honestly pretty awesome and funny. Max, of course, can't keep himself out of crazy situations. I mean, the game would be boring otherwise, but holy smokes! Literally, this is the first of many burning buildings or exploding buildings that Max ends up in before the end of the game. Guy can't go anywhere without something exploding. Sounds like a terrible curse. Like I said earlier, the atmosphere in this game is stellar. The sound design, the movement, the lack of music at times, and then the sudden intrusion of music at other times.
New York's finest. They're gonna be here soon. Just
Most of this game is deathly silent, and by deathly silent I mean a lack of music, as there is a lot of ambient sound.
I don't know, man. I don't know about this.
Quit worrying, man. Think of it as...
The beat of Max's footsteps on the ground, the sound of traffic in the distance, the creaks of buildings as the horrific howling wind outside in the raging snowstorm hits them. And, of course, gunfire. There are moments when music starts playing quite suddenly, and that's when you know stuff is about to go down. It doesn't always happen when firing guns. Of course, sometimes you get in gunfights and it's still just quiet, just the sound of people moving around and guns firing, but when the music kicks in, it really sets the scene, and it makes it kind of special. I really like this kind of spooky Scooby-Doo jive tune that plays every now and then. Makes you think something crazy and weird is about to happen, and it usually does. The levels as they go aren't anything to write home about from a visual perspective, but design-wise, there are quite a few fun fights and arenas and moments. What I mean is, when I think of Max Payne, there isn't a singular place that really sticks out to me, at least for the first game. More the overall vibe of the entire game. Going through these rundown buildings, these dirty subways and things like that, it all culminates into this idea of you going through the darker side of New York while you're trying to avenge your friend and your wife and daughter. And this all kind of mashes together because a lot of the places do look kind of similar in a sense because of that, because the theming is this seedy underbelly of New York. Okay, the Ragnarok Club does stick out to me a bit, but there's like a giant scary vampiric face in the main room, and then like a cult sacrifice room towards the end. Also this guy, I love how 90s this guy is. This is literally just like one of the developers or their friends with a fake face tattoo trying to act tough, and it's great in how silly it is. By the way, this guy is Jack Lupino, one of the first big bads Max takes on, who is addicted to Valkyr himself, which has led him to basically worship every dark god or devil you could ever think of.
Beelzebub, Asmodeus, Baphomet, Lucifer, Loki, Cthulhu, Lilith, Hela, blood given to you all.
And killing some of his own men as sacrifices to these dark gods, or at least any of them that would listen. The characters are a big deal, if you can't tell. So many of the people that Max encounters are strange, weird, or very particular characters, some of which I've mentioned and others that I will mention later. It means they don't have to be particularly complex for them to stick out or be interesting within the context of the story. Like, we've got Vinny Gognitti, the classic whiny and cowardly mobster with a voice that sounds like this.
God, oh God, you shot me. Ah! You're dead, Payne. What the hell are you waiting for, you apes? Kill him!
He isn't particularly important in this game, besides the fact that he gives you some information to move the plot forward, but he does give you a good run before you actually get that info from him. As you go through the different areas of the game, you start to get little details that help piece together the bigger picture of the Valkyr case. You remember the call from the beginning of the game? Well, you start to get phone calls from another mysterious person who seems to be helping you. You pick up letters with stories of blackmail and deals gone wrong. Hints that the Aesir Corporation is somehow connected to all of this. The game does respect your intelligence enough to let you try and piece it together yourself until the plot is resolved later on. After killing Jack Lupino, Max ends up getting drugged by the femme fatale of the game, Mona Sachs. Before that, she tells Max that Jack Lupino couldn't have set him up because he was crazy for a long time before any of this happened, and that his real target is the head of the Punchinello family. She knows this because she's the sister to the mob boss that Max is after, and wants the guy dead because he's a wife beater and she believes he'll eventually kill her sister. She drugs Max because she's scared that Max will end up getting her killed when he goes in there guns a-blazing. Max's drug-induced dream is when the first of those nightmare sequences that I mentioned earlier happens. Max is in a warped version of the home that he shared with his wife and daughter, eventually leading to him running along a trail of blood that acts like a tightrope walk, while your wife and your baby both cry and beg in the background. It's terrifying and disturbing, and as an adult, a little bit frustrating, because the blood you have to run on is kind of finicky and very thin. While this is happening, in real life, Max is kidnapped and taken back to the hotel from earlier in the game, where a man with a baseball bat who loves cartoons is torturing him with said baseball bat. And by torture, I mean just beating the living crap out of him.
I love to watch cartoons.
His calling sign, by the way, the baseball bat guy, is to leave newspapers with his favorite comic strip on it, which is Captain Baseball Bat Boy, if you couldn't guess. Of course, Max manages to escape and kills him and basically every one of his goons, because that's just what Max does. He also says some pretty sick one-liners as he's doing so.
I don't know about angels, but it's fear that gives men wings.
And also some incredibly stupid lines, which I still love. I love everything that Max Payne says, just about.
Bad things happened in the night, on the streets of that other city, Noir York City.
Oh god. Max drops a lot of these lines because this game is basically a mishmash of homages to different kinds of pulp media. The classic pulp detectives of old, the gunplay and cinematography is an homage to Hong Kong action cinema like John Woo, as well as The Matrix and many more. Twin Peaks and basically David Lynch's entire filmography is an obvious inspiration on the writing of this game and many of the other Remedy games. And the former gets a pretty direct homage on a random TV in one of the rundown buildings that Max runs into.
Flamingo speaks. You can speak here. It says,
Mirrors are more fun than television.
that's mirrors are more fun than television.
I've got good news. Muir is going to.
And it could be argued that their later game, Alan Wake, is basically in its entirety a Twin Peak homage.
Don't go in there, young man. You can hurt yourself in the dark.
Remedy also loves to play with Norse mythology and has done so in almost every one of their games, and this game is one of the first in their catalog to express that love, as most of the story is set with tons of allusions to the Norse gods and the world-ending event Ragnarok from Norse mythology. This has been a little bit of a tangent, but I do love that this game wears so much of its inspiration on its sleeve. I actually like that Remedy does that for a lot of their games. Anyway, after escaping from Captain Baseball Bat Boy, Max meets up with a Russian gangster known as Vlad, who loves to play the part of the gangster and is incredibly charming, admittedly. They strike up a deal, and Max helps him get back his tanker ship full of weapons in the only way he knows how. This also leads to this incredible line, which I kept saying over and over after hearing it. It's probably one of the best lines in the game, in my opinion.
Dime sent you.
After this, Max tries to set up a meeting with the leader of the Punchinellos, only to end up in a restaurant that is seemingly the size of a hospital. This is a great and memorable sequence, but again, also kind of silly. The introduction starts in this small, dark, restaurant-y looking room with this creepy but enchanting sting of music, which then begins to explode and burn up. Of course, in a panic, you start to run and have to go through this long sequence of trial and error to find out where to go to help Max live. And again, this is legitimately one of the biggest restaurants I've seen in my entire life in any video game. It's like 4 different giant restaurants combined into one super restaurant. It is insane. Then, Max gets to shoot up an entire mansion full of goons, and to find out that things are much bigger than the Punchinellos. But before he can pull the trigger, a bunch of killer suits come in and ruin everything. We finally get a face to the true villain of the story, and Max is then given a massive dose of Valkyr by her, hoping that it would kill him. Instead, it leads to another nightmare sequence. One of the funniest and coolest in the game, if you ask me, just because of what happens. You get these classic bits of dialogue and scenes poking fun at the game itself and its own styling.
I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
We also get to see Sam Lake flex a bit of his Dadaist poetry skills very early on, which would later be used in Control for the Hiss incantation.
Bartender is shiny stuff and dreams are made of stupid necromancers. He sings like a banana wrist having strayed too close to the constellations on their shaved skulls.
We build you till nothing remains. The 8 cracks in the truth will emerge out of you. You are whole. You remind us of whole. You've taken your boss with you. Boss with you. Hair. Those hair must be eaten. Under the conceptual reality behind this reality, you must want its waves to drag it away.
Of course, Max survives, and having heard from the Lady in the Dagger Heels where she was going, Max follows. This is when things finally start to click together for him and us as the audience as well, and the final details finally start to fall into place. After running and gunning through a metal refinery full of mercenaries, Max gets to go into a secret lab. You know, what game in the 90s didn't have some kind of secret underground lab or something like that? Like, seriously, it feels like almost everything made then needed to have it. In the lab, we find out quite a bit. That Valkyr was a failed government experiment to basically make a drug to help soldiers' stamina and morale. They basically wanted to invent super meth, because meth was also invented for this same thing, I'm pretty sure. The project was ended because, well, the drug was incredibly addictive and also basically caused the users to go into horribly violent episodes of psychosis. Of course, doing as rich and powerful people do, one of the people did not care and continued it anyway, seeing big dollar signs with the idea of people being addicted and going crazy, and probably the possibility of it being used as a weapon. This person is also the one who happened to send those addicts to Max's house at the beginning of the game. You see, those guys that were in Max's house weren't actually addicts. They were forced to use the drug as test subjects in this lab, and were dropped off at Max's house because Max's wife, Michelle, was a file clerk for the district attorney and came across a file that implicated the Dagger-Heeled woman and the Valkyr project. We put 2 and 2 together because they're little memory flashes that Max experiences throughout the game and in those dream sequences, as well as the other little tidbits of information that we've gotten throughout the game. So long story short, Max's wife saw evidence, her and her daughter were taken out by this evil lady, which then sets into motion the entire story of Max Payne. Of course, you might think, like me, that Max's wife only saw the info like once, but the game kind of implies that she began to dig into it a little. I don't know, I feel like the evil lady's plan is incredibly flawed, but she's rich and powerful, so probably nobody told her it was a bad idea. After we find all this out, we finally get a resolution to the mystery of who killed our partner early on in the game. It was BB, a guy who was mentioned like maybe twice. He's the one that set up the meeting with Alex and you, and also the one who shot Alex, and he sounds like this.
Don't be like that, have a cigar.
I don't smoke.
Maxie, you have no idea how big this is. It's huge, you have no idea.
He's the typical overly evil, corrupt, know-it-all cop. So he's by far the most realistic depiction of a cop in this entire game. He drives away and you fight like a million of his goons and himself in a parking garage. It's a segment that I don't really like, but it's alright. From a gameplay perspective, I'm not a huge fan of it because it just feels very rushed and weird, and from a story perspective, it feels like this should have happened much earlier in the story, but it's just kind of being crammed in here as if they forgot about it. It's like one of the biggest complaints I actually have about this game. The guy does have a really funny line right before you whack him, so that's a positive.
You know, I really hate people who refuse to see the inevitable. Refuse to do the smart thing.
No, I must do the right thing.
Anyway, we kill him and then we get another mysterious phone call, and finally we meet our other mysterious benefactor person, who's helping us, but he's kind of not a good guy. Like, he's helping us, but he's kind of like how Vlad isn't a good guy and he's helping us. This guy is Alfred Woden. He's the one-eyed man that has been mentioned throughout the game a few times. He's also the guy who is being blackmailed by this chick. He tells us that he's part of the Inner Circle, an Illuminati-like group that has been doing stuff in the shadows for business and the government for like forever. He tells us who the evil woman is. Her name is Nicole Horn, and she was also part of this group and the Valkyr Project at some point, but when it was canceled, she was like, nuh-uh, and kept doing it anyway. He basically says like, hey, you kill her, and we will make sure that all of this goes away and nothing will fall on you. Then, some killer suits show up again and do what killer suits do, which is try to kill everyone in the room, and they mostly succeed, but Max escapes, of course. Woden also survives, and while escaping, Max grabs the tape that has the blackmail on it for him, just in case he decides he's not going to hold up his end of the bargain. So we finally head into the finale of Max Payne, which I didn't mention, but that flash at the beginning of the game is actually a flash from the finale. Max goes to the Aesir Corporation, which, hey, another allusion to Norse mythology, just like Alfred Woden is supposed to be like Odin. Max, of course, takes out waves of suits and armed guards, and then he finally meets Nicole Horn for the second or third time, like, who basically admits, like, yeah, I killed your wife and child, and so what? I'm rich and important, and you're nobody. And of course, Max doesn't like that. So what does Max do? Well, he drops a radio antenna on her helicopter and blows her the fuck up. And thus ends Max Payne. Look, earlier in the video I said Max Payne was more than the sum of its parts, right? When summed up shortly, as I just did, the game doesn't sound so spectacular, but it would be like describing an amazingly simply dinner date with the love of your life. To anyone else it might sound kind of boring, but to you it's all about the little details. The atmosphere, the way the game looks chunky and old, and all these like realistic faces on these like flat compressed sprites. The graphic novel panels that tell us the story, sometimes using real life pictures and sometimes using the blocky models in the game. The gritty feeling of it all, the gunplay and the movement. The soundtrack, it's everything. All of it adds together to make this fantastic package that is simultaneously goofy and disturbing, simultaneously thrilling and old school. There's so much about this game I love. The music, while sparse, is incredibly fitting for the themes of the game. It can feel enchanting and surreal like the rest of the game. It also just feels very 90s. A lot of this game being very 90s gives it its charm, and its gameplay is a big reason that it actually holds up along with all of that. As for the story and the characters, I've always thought that the best pieces of media are those that can manage to encompass a lot of the human experience and emotions into one story. That would be sadness, happiness, comedy, anger, tragedy, the whole shebang, and I feel that Max Payne definitely does that. The opening, as I said, is still incredibly disturbing to this day, but also becomes a little silly when it cuts from the terrifyingly ambient gameplay to this. But that doesn't lessen the impact of what happens, at least not to me. And the story doesn't seem incredibly deep on its face, but it does have layers. The top layer, of course, is the straight-up revenge story. Max going on a tear, taking out everyone who is involved in the death of his loved ones, and the corruption of the city through Valkyr. From the beginning, he only thinks he's taking down the people who spread the drug, only to find out that it's much bigger than that. But then we also see Max's grief, manifested quite directly in the dream sequences, where he sees himself murdering his wife because he feels that him being unable to protect her and not spending enough time with her was as good as killing her himself.
Murderer! You killed her!
He feels that if he just worked less and paid more attention, he could have done something more. He also kills the old version of himself in that nightmare sequence, meaning that he's become a different man completely, and that original version of Max, the one that was married and just a regular father, American dream kind of guy, is basically dead. He died with his family, and this version of Max is a completely different person. We also have the connections to Norse mythology throughout the game, the grand snowstorm and the allusions to Ragnarok that are connected to it. Alfred Woden basically being a human personification of Odin, and Nicole Horn running a corporation that's called Aesir. Aesir were a sect of gods in Norse mythology, specifically a lot of the most popular ones that people knew. Odin, Thor, Loki, Freya. It isn't one-to-one, of course. There's no Nicole Horn in Norse mythology, but you get it. Valkyr is also an obvious reference to the Valkyries, the female goddess-like figures that would choose the slain to go to Valhalla and feast and fight in preparation of Ragnarok, though in the game, of course, it's a drug that just makes people develop psychosis and become violent, apparently. And there's also the death of Alex Balder, Max's friend, and the moment that really kicks off the action of the game. In Norse mythology, the death of Balder is what begins Ragnarok. You could argue that characters like Woden and Horn are paired with godlike ideas and symbolism because of their status within the world of Max Payne. Both of them are very powerful and part of an Illuminati-like group that pulls the strings behind the scenes of the world. While not gods in the immortal and having crazy powers sense, they are gods in the sense that they do wield immense power within the mortal world and also influence. They also probably think of themselves in godlike terms. Horn for sure seemed to think herself invincible and seemed to play with the lives of others as if they were beneath her, as the gods in mythology tended to do with mortals. Woden does as well, manipulating not only Max Payne, but also the events of the game to make himself the most powerful man in the inner circle. And this itself is sort of a commentary on the rich and powerful, even if it isn't terrifically deep. Nicole Horn did everything she did because she wanted more money and power, no matter who it hurt. And look, there's a bunch of other connections to Norse mythology throughout the game, so if you want to know them, you can play the game yourself or look them up. It's still pretty interesting stuff, and it's pretty fun to find those connections. Then there's the overall intentionality in the way the game is played and how it plays into the story, as well as how Max is represented as a character. Max is a pretty obvious love letter to pulp and noir-style detective stories. Just about any time Max opens his mouth, he's making some dramatic comparative of the seedy and dark underbelly he's exploring or maneuvering or shooting throughout. Max's revenge story and the Norse mythology part of the story both play into each other. They are tied together. Max, in a sense, is a warrior going through this tale. And yes, I know I criticized the level design earlier in the video, but even if the levels aren't always the most memorable overall and can even become a bit samey as you go through them, that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of little details and moments that add to the experience. Things like the environmental storytelling, the fun little Easter eggs and jokes on the TVs or billboards.
Lady Amelia, Marquis Valentine asks for an audience.
Thank you,
My lady.
My lord?
And now, in all
My lord, there is?
Indeed, my lady, there is indeed. From the very first moment we met, upon that distant forest path, there has been sunlight in the autumn leaves blazing like the colors of your hair.
Oh, my lord, you should not speak so.
One of my favorites is this Buffy the Vampire Slayer Easter egg that I randomly found for the first time in my most recent playthrough, after having played this game for 20 years.
I didn't want to know what had happened here. It was not a pretty sight.
Then there's the healing system, which intentionally or unintentionally implies that not only Max is addicted to pain pills, but also that most of the world he lives in is addicted to pain pills as well, as there are these pain pill cabinets everywhere, and it exposes some of that darkness of how this pharmaceutical company or companies has so much control over the world that Max lives in, kinda similar to our own world, huh? The game is pretty cinematic, and it could be argued to be one of, if not the first, cinematic third-person shooters that would later become so big, heavily inspired by things like Hong Kong kung fu action movies of John Woo, not to mention the wave of pulp and noir movies that happened in the 80s and 90s, before the game even began development, some even being mentioned directly in the game itself.
The best movie ending ever? Gotta be Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. A hero's end, going out with guns blazing. Never heard of it. No? Okay, newer stuff then. The Usual Suspects, where Spacey walks out of the police station and suddenly loses his limb. Or hey, 7, where Brad Pitt gets to that head-sized blood-soaked cardboard box.
And look, again, I can't heap praise on this game enough even to this day. The old school visual styles of it, the low-key soundscape, the gunplay that still feels fresh 20 years later. Every gun feels useful at one point or another, and they all feel pretty well designed and unique. Even if I can say I think shotguns are probably one of the worst type of guns in the entire game, especially on the higher difficulties. In tandem with that, the slow-mo system, while relatively simple, was also a pretty big deal, as it was the first real bullet time-like thing used in a shooter at that point. You could mainly just freeze time for a bit or do some cool dives, but in tandem with how tight-feeling the guns are, and also the bullets which move realistically through space, it can lead to some pretty amazing moments. Especially with the sniper rifle. I love the sniper rifle. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Play this game! It's good, it's fantastic. Still one of the best action games ever made, in my opinion. They're remaking it, and they're going to combine it with the second one, The Fall of Max Payne, into a single cohesive game and story. And I'm really excited about it, but also a bit worried. Because I'm wondering how they're going to capture what makes the original and its sequel so special in that remake. Especially because the first and second game are even very different in their own right. In a trilogy where the third game has a dramatically different tone and writing style and was made by a different studio completely. If they can capture the darkness of the original and the almost horror and disturbing atmosphere of certain parts, while also capturing more of the action-y and over-the-topness of the second game, the nerves of there being a gun-wielding goon around every corner wanting to stop you, while also still having some humor to it, then I'll be happy. And I'm not entirely worried, as I said earlier in this video, the echoes of Max Payne have sounded through nearly every single game Remedy has ever made, and they're the ones working on that remake. On a surface level, some of the themes and character types alone carry on through their other games. In Alan Wake, off the top of my head, the main villain is an older woman with allusions to her being a hag or witch-like character, similar to Nicole Horn. Alan is the main protagonist of Alan Wake and is on a quest to get his wife back, a similar driving force to Max Payne, where a woman is the driver of the story for the male lead. There are allusions to Norse mythology, and specifically two characters who are analogs to the Norse gods. It is a third-person action thriller shooter that has slow-mo featured occasionally. Alan is fighting the darker side of a relatively unassuming town in the mountains, while Max is fighting the darker side of a relatively assuming side of New York.
Noir York City.
Oh god. That one's not my strongest argument. I'm mentioning all of this because the straight-up easiest thing to bring up would be the fact that Max Payne has a direct analog in the story of Alan Wake. Alan Wake is a famous writer who got popular writing a series of pulp noir detective novels called Alex Casey. Alex Casey is voiced by the voice actor of Max Payne and is essentially Max Payne without, he's like, we don't have the rights, Max Payne.
13 years after I'd gotten my revenge, it had finally caught up with me.
Both of those names, by the way, are in Max Payne. Alex Casey. Alex is Max's friend Alex Boulder, and Casey is a funny billboard beer that you see at one point. Control and Quantum Break are also third-person action games. Remedy just knows what they're good at. I haven't played Quantum Break, but I can say Control does feel like an evolution of what Max Payne started as. Not to mention that James McCaffrey, Max Payne's voice actor, again voices and plays a character.
Something's coming. This threat. An attack.
Who does feel very Max Payne-like, even though it's not one-to-one. He even kind of looks like an older version of him, in my opinion, which, I'm pretty sure he's actually played by James McCaffrey, so maybe they just made Max Payne look like James McCaffrey, for all I know. And then there's Alan Wake 2. Look, Alan Wake 2 is essentially a love letter to almost every game Remedy has ever made. It is literally them looking back at their entire history and going, let's make that a game. Alex Casey in Alan Wake 2 is directly in the game as a living person who is again voiced by Max Payne's voice actor James McCaffrey.
Got the boot pretty quick after that.
but is also played physically by Sam Lake, which is itself a callback to Max Payne, as Max Payne in the original game is voiced by James McCaffrey and modeled after Sam Lake, and Alex Casey is a written character who is based off of Max Payne, but they can't say that. It's a lot. Then the dark place in Alan Wake 2 that Alan is stuck in is basically a giant, realistic New York City that is itself kind of Max Payne-like, and he encounters Alex Casey as the written novel version, which of course looks just like Max Payne. It's Sam Lake, even dressed to the nines like that, with James McCaffrey's voice. You also go through a seedy hotel and a subway station and the rooftops and apartments. It's funny to say that Alan's side of the story in Alan Wake 2 feels like a survival horrified love letter to Max Payne, while Saga's feels like a survival horrified love letter to the original Alan Wake, but I'm getting a little bit off topic saying that. And look, I don't think Alan Wake 2 is the perfect game, but it's just really cool that they did all of this, and I'm genuinely excited to see the future of this series, Alan Wake, Max Payne, Control, and the remakes, and how they'll tie everything back into their own work if Rockstar lets them, which I hope they do. And look, this is just scratching the surface, really. I could go on and on. There are so many deep cuts and little tidbits throughout all of these games they've made that reference each other. So again, if you've got any that you think are cool that I didn't mention, throw them in the comments. And before we move on, one last sappy note is that Max Payne is really the reason that Remedy still exists today. Them selling it to Rockstar allowed them the funds to make Max Payne 2 as well as make Alan Wake. So while it is sad that Remedy doesn't own the rights to Max Payne, it is what allowed them to continue as a company and make such great games as Control, Quantum Break, Alan Wake 2, and FBC Firebreak, which I do enjoy, but you know, it's not their greatest game ever by a long shot. Also, tell me how many times I've said Max Payne in this video. I am going to say it a few more times, so include those. Again, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe if you think I've said Max Payne the perfect amount of times, or not. Just subscribe anyway, because it'll help me out. If you like this video, let me know also in the comments. It's a bit different than my output as of late, but I love video games and always will, and I love Max Payne. It's up there as one of my favorite games of all time, possibly, and it took me a long time to realize that, but yeah, it's such a fun, atmospheric game that just feels like infinitely replayable, and it's all about the journey. I was legitimately sad the day that I finished the game on my most recent playthrough. Like, yes, I could just play it through again, but man, running through it and just getting through it like that, it's amazing. If enough people enjoy this video, I may make a video on the second game or even the third game. I'd love to talk about the difference between 3 and the first two. You know, that 3 is the one that's made by Rockstar, and the first two are made by Remedy. Remedy did act as supervisors on Max Payne 3, giving them feedback on the gameplay and story, but it was written by Downhauser and made by Rockstar. They legitimately they didn't get to make any full-on choices for the game. And Downhauser, by the way, is the guy who wrote like most of the GTAs and Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2 and stuff. So yeah. Thanks for watching. I'm Ghosts on Holiday. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're not watching this at Christmas time, well, I hope you're having a good day, maybe a good Easter or whatever holiday you have. Cinco de Mayo? I don't know. Goodbye. Mwah. Kisses. Like, subscribe, pee and poop. Bye.
The train lit up like a Christmas tree.
I don't know about this.
Quit worrying, man. Think of it as Christmas.
What the hell?
And then it was all over. The storm seemed to lose its frenzy. The ragged clouds gave way to the stars above.